We begin our running back rankings with players that are solid flex plays for us. So at 36, we have Zeke. 35, we have Zach Moss. 34, we have Javonte Williams. 33, we have Tajay Spears. 32, we have B-Rob. 31, we have Chuba. At 30, we have Devin Singletary. And 29, we have Chase Brown. So Zeke is in a game in which the Cowboys are likely to win. So I project that they'll probably want to salt the clock away. And Zeke is a solid bet for a touchdown. I presume that he's going to be the goal line back in this offense. They did just sign Dalvin Cook, and they do have Rico Dowdle. I think that Rico Dowdle is going to get most of the catches in this game, with Dalvin Cook being sprinkled in here and there, but I think Zeke does have the goal line role on lock, so I think he's a decent bet for a touchdown. I just wouldn't project too high of a finish for him due to the lack of total volume here and the fact that he's kind of washed. Then we have Zach Moss against the Patriots. They actually didn't allow quite as many rushing yards per game, and they did allow 3.3 yards per carry. Now, Zach Moss isn't necessarily the best receiving back, so it isn't per se quite as good of a matchup as you might think on paper, but he finds himself in a Bengals offense where he's going to be the goal line back. They have Joe Burrow back. They still got Chase and Higgins. They even have Jermaine Burton now, and even Mike Gesicki. So I think it's going to be a pretty high-scoring offense, and so he's a solid bet to get a rushing touchdown. Javonte Williams plays against the Seahawks this week. I would like to put him a little bit higher, but it is a game that I expect the Broncos to be losing. And with them having Jaleel McLaughlin on the team, I think he's going to soak up a good amount of targets this week. I just think that the overall volume for Javonte is going to keep him above Jaleel McLaughlin. I think they're going to cannibalize each other this week. In a better matchup, I'd have Javonte a little bit higher, but I do expect them to be losing to Seattle, so I think that his upside is a little bit limited this week. Then we have Tajay Spears against Chicago. So he's going to be in a timeshare with Tony Pollard. I think due to his reception upside, Tajay Spears has a very safe floor. I just think that they're probably going to give Tony Pollard the goal line carries for the most part. So I think that his upside is pretty limited now. Then you have Brian Robinson against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This could go either way. I expect it to be a relatively close game. I think Brian Robinson and Jaden Daniels are going to have a lethal read option game in the red zone. We've already seen it in the preseason. I just worry that Jaden Daniels is going to steal a lot of rushing touchdowns away. However, he's a decent bet for a touchdown. I just think that his ceiling is capped with Austin Eckler likely poaching all of the receptions for the most part. Then we have Chuba Hubbard. There's a decent chance with Dave Canales there now that this is a close game between them and New Orleans. I think that Dave Canales is going to want to take the ball out of Bryce Young's hands and run the ball as much as they really can. We saw that Rachaad White this past season had a lot of usage. So I think that between Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, who's completely washed, Hubbard is the better play this week. And I think he's going to get a decent amount of volume in a game that should be relatively close. Then we have Devin Singletary against the Vikings. So I do expect the Giants to be losing this game handily. So I don't think his rushing volume is going to be quite as good as it could be some weeks, but I do think that he's going to get a solid amount of receptions out of the backfield. It's just that with this offense not being projected to be very good and score very many touchdowns this season, I don't think that he's a very high upside bet for touchdowns in general. I think that he's going to be a very safe floor running back for us. And then Chase Brown, he's going to be in a timeshare with Zach Moss here. I think that he does have a little bit more upside because he is likely to get a decent amount of carries in this game, and they're probably going to be winning by a substantial amount. I just think that the goal line upside isn't going to be there, so I think he has a higher floor than Zach Moss. It's just both of their ceilings are capped by each other. And so I think all of these players are solid flex plays that lack a good amount of upside, but should present you with a pretty sturdy floor. This tier of running backs are running backs that I expect to be high-end 3s to potentially low-end 2s. We have Zamir White at 28, Jaylen Warren at 27, Jerome Ford at 26, and Raheem Mostert at 25. So Zamir White, his upside is really capped because while he's a decent rusher of the football, we saw at the end of this past season what he was capable of, he isn't the best receiver, and they drafted Dylan Labe, who's a very, very solid receiving back. I think that Zamir White is going to get most of the carries, but Dylan Labe is going to get a lot of receiving work, thus curbing Zamir White's upside. It's going to be a ground and pound approach from the Chargers. I think they're going to be winning this game for the most part. And so I think that the upside is going to be limited for Zamir White this week because he's probably not going to receive the volume that we'd prefer. Then we have Jalen Warren against the Falcons. I do like Jalen Warren a little bit more than I would most weeks because while I think he's really, really talented and actually one of the most underrated running backs in the league, don't confuse that with the best, but underrated. This Arthur Smith scheme does not seem to be working. He asks his linemen to be able to get to the second level against linebackers, and the line just isn't good enough to do this. So he started to try to use some deception. And while that can work from time to time, if your line just isn't really capable of effectively running your scheme, I don't believe in either one of these running backs between him and Najee Harris for the most part. In that I think their efficiency is just not going to be that great. It's not that they're not talented. So I think he's going to have a little bit more of a safe floor this week because I think they're going to be losing to Atlanta now that Atlanta actually has quarterbacks that can play. So I think he's a very safe floor option. It's just once they get around the goal line, if they're capable of doing that, this is going to be one of the lowest scoring offenses. I think Najee Harris is going to be the power back around the goal line. So I think that if Jalen Warren's going to score, it's probably going to be from 15, 20 yards out. So once again, a safe floor play, but probably not the best ceiling. Now we have Jerome Ford against Dallas. I expect them to be losing this game. They have Dante Foreman to steal goal line touches. So I think his upside is also limited, just like with Jalen Warren. I think he's going to get a decent amount of carries between the 20s, and then I think he's going to get most of the receiving work. So I think he's a very safe floor play, just probably lacks a touchdown upside. And then as soon as Nick Chubb comes back, he's going way down in these rankings. But for now, he's a solid low-end RB2, high-end RB3. Then we have Raheem Mostert. He could potentially have a big week. Any one of these Dolphins running backs can. It's going to be a matchup against Jacksonville. I expect this to be a shootout between the teams, so there is touchdown upside here. I just think that with him being 32 years old, there's potential for him to show a lot more regression. We didn't really see anything from him in the preseason. We saw a lot of Jalen Wright. I think it's just a matter of time before Jalen Wright takes over his spot in the backfield, but he is a very high theoretical upside play this week. It's just with them now having 3 running backs, I think that muddies up the situation a little bit, but he could theoretically finish within the top 20. So this tier of running backs are likely RB2s. We have Najee Harris at 24, Tony Pollard at 23, DeAndre Swift at 22, David Montgomery at 21, Aaron Jones at 20, Ramondre Stevenson at 19, and James Cook at 18. Najee Harris is up against Atlanta. Just like with Jalen Warren, this is a game I expect them to be losing. I just think in Arthur Smith's scheme, he likes to use the power back a little bit more than the elusive back. It was extremely frustrating to see Tyler Algier eating into Bijan Robinson's carries. It made no sense. That's just what Arthur Smith likes to do. He had Derrick Henry before, and so he does have a tendency to favor his power backs. Now, I just don't expect this offense to be scoring many points. However, if they do get up to the goal line in this game, I think Najee Harris is the back to own. So I think he does have a little bit more upside than Jalen Warren does this week. I think Najee Harris is probably just once again an RB2. It's not the best matchup in that they'll probably be losing. If they face a terrible team like the Giants, I think that'd be a perfect week to start him. Then we have Tony Pollard against the Chicago Bears. I think that he is the back to own between him and Tajay Spears because I think he's going to get the goal line work. With them signing Tony Pollard, they're going to want to make sure that they get their money worth out of him. So I think he's going to lead this team in carries in what should be a relatively close game. The Titans have a pretty solid pass defense, so I think they're going to do a decent job stopping the Bears overall in terms of limiting their scoring. I just think that they're probably going to have to run the ball a good amount this game against the Bears. The Bears have a very stingy pass defense. So I think this is going to be a primarily run-heavy game for the Titans this week. And I think Tony Pollard is the beneficiary here. It's just that with him being in a timeshare with Tajay Spears, it kind of limits his upside too. But I think if they get a rushing touchdown, it's probably going to be Tony Pollard this week. So then we have DeAndre Swift, who is facing the Titans. It's not a particularly good matchup for him either. The good news is, though, it's a very, very good-looking offense right now with Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and DJ Moore out there, along with Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett. The way I see it, he's probably going to get a majority of the carries, and he's almost certainly going to get all the receptions here. So I think he's a very safe floor running back this week. I just think against the Titans defense, he's probably not the most high upside running back this week. Then we have David Montgomery against the Rams. This should be an absolute shootout. I expect a lot of points in this game. Now, the Rams defense did lose Aaron Donald, so that is very, very good. I just think that with Jahmyr Gibbs going into his second season, we saw at the latter half of the year that they were trying to get him more and more involved at the expense of David Montgomery. However, David Montgomery provides a very, very safe floor. He's a decent touchdown bet this week. I just think with him getting a lot less of the receptions and then, slightly more than half the carries, it just limits his weekly upside. But he's a solid RB2. Then we have Aaron Jones against the Giants. I do expect them to beat the Giants, so I think there's going to be a decent amount of work. I just don't think that they're going to want to overuse an older running back in Aaron Jones. I think that he's a good bet for a touchdown this week. I just don't think that they're going to need to use him because they're going to be winning rather handily. I think in a more competitive game, he would be a much better play. Now, with Ramondre Stevenson, he plays the Bengals this week. I do expect them to be losing. I don't expect them to be scoring very, very many points. So I think that his ceiling is definitely limited. I think he's a very safe floor play, and I think that he's going to get almost all of the running back touches. It's just without a lot of touchdown upside, I just can't really rank him much higher than a solid RB2. Then we have James Cook against the Cardinals. I think he is definitely being overdrafted and is valued higher than he should be. He already had running back Josh Allen to steal the rushing touchdowns. Then they drafted Ray Davis. If James Cook scores a touchdown, it's probably from over 20 yards out. He's a very safe floor play because they are likely to be a very bad team. It's just both of these teams have terrible defenses, so I think it's going to be somewhat of a shootout. But I think that Ray Davis is the one that benefits from that the most. But once again, I think James Cook is a very, very safe floor play because he's likely to get, 4 or 5 catches this week. So a very, very safe RB2. It's just without the touchdown upside, it's hard to project him as much better than that. These tier of running backs are likely mid RB2s to potentially low end RB1s, just depending on touchdown upside for the most part. At 17, I have Alvin Kamara, 16, Joe Mixon, 15, Derrick Henry, 14, James Conner, 13, Isaiah Pacheco, 12, Rashad White, 11, Josh Jacobs, and 10, Kenneth Walker III. With Alvin Kamara, I think he's a very, very safe floor play with a very, very solid ceiling. It's just we've seen decline from him in the rushing department. I expect him to be just a little bit worse than he was this past season. We've seen that they've been begging Kendre Miller to do anything. He hasn't, so that is one reason to like Alvin Kamara. I expect them to be in a somewhat back and forth game against the Panthers. They might lose now. Now that they have Dave Canales in terms of the Panthers head coach. So I think he's a very, very safe floor play with a decent ceiling. If he gets a touchdown this week, he could definitely finish right around as the RB12, I'd imagine. With Joe Mixon, he plays against the Colts. I expect it to be a relatively close game between the two of them. I think he definitely has a low-end RB1 upside in this game. It should be pretty back and forth. We'll just have to see how this plays out. In the red zone, CJ Stroud has so many playmakers. It's going to be a hard bet from a week-to-week basis to see who scores touchdowns, although there should be plenty of them anyways. And so I think Joe Mixon is a very, very solid back and a solid RB2 that could potentially be a low-end RB1 if he gets a touchdown this week. At 15, we have Derrick Henry against the Chiefs. Most weeks, I would rank Derrick Henry a lot higher. Now, the only reason is, even as a Ravens fan, there is a potential that we get absolutely blown out by the Chiefs this week. So if Baltimore is losing, that does severely limit Derrick Henry's upside this week. He's just not the best receiving back. But should this be a close game or a shootout, there is a lot of upside for Derrick Henry. I expect him to be scoring a lot of rushing touchdowns this season. Him and Lamar is going to be very, very challenging for defenses to stop. This one could go either way. Once again, it just depends on how close the game is. At 14, we have James Conner against Buffalo. Buffalo is going to have one of the worst defenses that there is. I do expect him to be losing a little bit of work to Trey Benson, although I think he's definitely going to be the lead back as long as he stays healthy. There is a good chance for him to score a touchdown this week. I just think that a couple of the running backs ahead of him are going to get a much more full workload. But once again, he does have the upside to be a low-end RB1 this week. Then we have Isaiah Pacheco against Baltimore. Now, if they are blowing out Baltimore, there is a chance that he gets a lot more work and could finish higher than RB13. If it's a closer game, I do expect them to be passing the ball a little bit more. Now, the good news is Clyde Edwards-Helaire was put on IR. The only potential downside is we've seen Carson Steele, for instance. He looked really, really good in the preseason, so there's a chance that he may not have the goal line work that like we've seen in the past. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But if they are winning, he's a good bet to get a lot of volume. He is a pretty decent receiver as well. So it shouldn't shock anybody if he finishes as a top 12 running back. At 12, I have Rachaad White. So Washington isn't the best matchup. I do expect him to get a solid workload, though. We'll have to see how Bucky Irving does. They've said in the past that they want to limit Rachaad White's touches to keep him fresh. He's one of the least efficient rushers of the football that there is in the NFL. However, he is one of the better receiving backs. So he does possess a very, very safe floor from the aspect of him being a very good receiving back. I do expect this to be a back and forth game against Washington now that Washington has Jaden Daniels and some semblance of good quarterback play projected at least. So he's a decent bet for a touchdown. He should have the goal line work. I just think that some of the running backs going ahead of him have just much more weekly upside now that Dave Canales isn't their head coach. I expect their offense to regress. Now, we have Josh Jacobs against the Philadelphia Eagles. Running against Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis is not ever fun for anybody. However, he does find himself in Green Bay, who is much more likely to be scoring touchdowns. I expect this to be a shootout type of game, and he should get pretty much all of the receiving work as well. So I think that he's a very solid play this week, just not as high as he would be most weeks if it wasn't such a difficult matchup. At 10, I have Kenneth Walker against the Broncos. I expect the Seahawks to be easily winning this game. I think they're going to want to salt the game away with running the ball. I think that Kenneth Walker in general is going to be more of a bell cow than we've seen in previous years. I really like this Ryan Grubb system. I think he's going to score a lot of touchdowns this season. And I think this is going to be a very high volume game for him, and he has a lot of upside this week. This next tier of running backs are running backs that I expect to be in the top 10, but could be mid to low end RB1s. We have Travis Etienne Jr. at 9 and Devon Achane at 8. So Travis Etienne is in a game where I do expect the Jags and Dolphins to be in somewhat of a shootout. I expect that Etienne is going to get a good amount of work this game and is a very high touchdown upside play this week. There's just running backs ahead of him that are much more talented than he is. So I think he's going to be more volume driven and touchdown upside driven this week. And so I think he's a very, very safe play with a lot of upside. There's just, once again, more talented running backs going ahead of him. Then at 8, Devon Achane against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the other running back in this game. I would like to put him a little bit higher, but with him being in a timeshare, he could get you 50 points or he could get you 10. I do expect this to be, once again, a shootout, so I expect a lot of points in this game. Now, the only thing is, now Achane also has to deal with Jalen Wright as well as Raheem Mostert. I expect Mostert and Achane to enter the season getting a majority of the carries, but there's always the potential that Jalen Wright just works his way up in there. So we'll have to see and play this by ear throughout the season, but he is one of the most high upside running backs and could theoretically finish as a top 5 back if he's able to break a long touchdown this week. This next tier of running backs are likely RB1s with RB1 overall potential upside this week. At 7, we have Jonathan Taylor against Houston. At 6, we have Kyren Williams against Detroit. At 5, we have Gibbs against the Rams. At 4, we have Barkley against Green Bay. At 3, we have Bijan against Pittsburgh. At 2, we have Breece against San Fran. And at 1, we have McCaffrey against the Jets. Now, Jonathan Taylor plays against Houston this week. Historically, he's done really well against Houston. I think this is going to be a very, very high point-scoring game. I don't expect Josh Downs to play this week, so I think they're going to be a little weak at wide receiver. They still have A.D. Mitchell, Alec Pierce, and Michael Pittman. I think this week and most weeks in general, they're going to want to be as run-heavy as they can to control the clock. So I think that Jonathan Taylor is a very high upside play this week, and his RB7 ranking shouldn't be taken as a slight because he could definitely be the RB1 this week. At 6, we have Kyren Williams against Detroit. I think this is going to be an absolutely high-scoring game. Kyren Williams is probably going to at least open the season primarily as the featured back. I think they are going to sprinkle in Blake Corum. Now, the thing that we have to worry about is Blake Corum is bigger in terms of his BMI, obviously. So I think that there is a threat for Kyren to lose his goal line role with this team. But for now, at least at the beginning of the season, I do expect him to be the featured back and get still goal line work. So I think this is a very, very good week to start him. He has a ton of upside. I just think that there are more talented backs ahead of him in this list. At 5, we have Jahmyr Gibbs against the Rams. It's going to be a very high-scoring game. He's really, really talented. I expect them to need to pass a lot to stay in this game, and so I think he's going to have a very, very solid week. And the Rams did lose Aaron Donald, so their run defense shouldn't be as good as it has been in past seasons. At 4, we have Saquon Barkley against Green Bay. This is a fantastic matchup. He finds himself with the Eagles now. It's going to be a very efficient offense. Now, the only thing is we'll have to see between him and Jalen Hurts what the touchdowns look like in general in terms of rushing the ball. So we'll have to pay attention to that for future rankings. But for now, I'm going to go under the assumption that around the goal line, they're going to want to save Jalen Hurts. He'll still get rushing touchdowns, but I don't think we're going to see a repeat of 15 on the ground from him. I think that's part of the reason they got Barkley there. So I think that Saquon Barkley is a fantastic upside play this week. At RB3, we have Bijan Robinson against Pittsburgh. Now, this is the Rams game. We've seen what Kyron Williams and Todd Gurley were able to do. It isn't the best matchup against Pittsburgh. I just expect them to be winning handily, and they're going to give him a lot of work. I think he's a solid bet to get a touchdown, and he's extremely talented. We're finally going to get to see what Bijan Robinson looks like in a real offense where he's not being benched for Tyler Algier. I know I'm excited. At 2, I have Breece Hall against San Fran. Now that they have Aaron Rodgers back, I think that Breece Hall, his upside is absolutely out of this world now. I expect them to be needing to pass to stay in games, so I think he's going to get a lot of receptions this game. Around the goal line, it's going to be him or Garrett Wilson for the most part. We'll see about Mike Williams, but I love Breece Hall for this week too. Even though San Fran isn't the best and most inviting matchup, I think there will be a lot of points this week. And at 1, we have Christian McCaffrey. Unless we see some clear regression with McCaffrey, or either Breece or Bijan generally has a really inviting matchup while McCaffrey doesn't, I expect Christian McCaffrey to usually be the RB1 on any given week. Now, the New York Jets are definitely not an inviting matchup in any way, shape, or form. However, he's so talented, and this offense is so talented overall. It's going to be really hard for any defense to slow down the 49ers. So I expect him to be involved heavily in this game with a solid amount of rushing touchdown upside and just general upside. Until he's not the RB1, he's going to be the RB1. All right, so the flex plays were Zeke Elliott, Zach Moss, Javonte Williams, Tajay Spears, Brian Robinson Jr., Chuba Hubbard, Devin Singletary, and Chase Brown. Then running backs that are likely low-end RB2s are Zamir White, Jalen Warren, Jerome Ford, and Raheem Mostert. These running backs do have the upside to be probably mid RB2s at best. Then we have running backs that are likely to be RB2s. We have Najee Harris, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, and James Cook. Then we have high-end RB2s to potential low-end RB1s. We have Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, Rashad White, and Kenneth Walker. Then we have running backs that are likely to be in the top 10 that could be top 5 options if they have a good week. You have Travis Etienne against Miami and Devon Achane against Jacksonville. And finally, we have stud RB1s that are definite threats to be the RB1 overall. We have Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Bijan, Breece, and McCaffrey. And so these are the tiered running back rankings for week 1. I'm going to be doing rankings for every position for every week. So if you've liked what you've seen and heard, feel free to like and subscribe. It's free. If you have any start-sit questions, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to help you out. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist. Feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you, and have a good day.